The day I got served court papers from an HOA I'm not even part of, I thought it had to be some kind of joke. But nope, Karen was dead serious. She was suing me for violating community standards on land that's outside the HOA boundary. I built my home here on purpose to avoid exactly this kind of nonsense. But Karen? She decided my property was too nice to not be under her control. What she didn't count on was how fast things would flip once 911 got involved. Because when the truth came out, let's just say she didn't walk away, she was escorted. Cedar Crest is a well-to-do suburban enclave where every inch of property is meticulously regulated by a strict homeowners association. The manicured lawns, uniform houses, and perfectly trimmed hedges seem to stand as a monument to conformity until you meet those who dare to be different. I'm one of those people. I chose Cedar Crest deliberately because of its beauty and the promise of a quiet life. Yet I also chose a plot of land outside its strict boundaries. Here, I built my sanctuary, a home that embraces creative freedoms and celebrates individuality without the suffocating rules imposed by the HOA. At the core of the HOA's vigilant watch is Karen Miller, notoriously known as HOA Karen. In her mid-50s, Karen is a walking encyclopedia of rules, armed with her clipboard, sharp eyes, and a deep-rooted belief that order must be maintained at any cost. To her, every stray decoration or bright burst of color is an affront to the community's orderly aesthetic. Karen has made it her life's work to police every detail, and her presence is both a reassurance to those who crave uniformity and a source of dread for those who value personal expression. In contrast to her, I value the freedom to design my life on my own terms. My property lies just beyond the reach of the HOA's jurisdiction. Over the years, I've cultivated a space that blends modern innovation with rustic charm, a testament to hard work, sustainability, and creativity. I operate a small business, provide locally sourced produce, and invest in art and design that reflect who I am. This is exactly why I chose to live outside the strict boundaries of Cedar Crest, to live freely without the constant interference of rules I never agreed to. My friends and neighbors respect my independence and often share stories of their own struggles under the HOA's arbitrary fines and inflexible standards. While many conform to the status quo for fear of retribution, I have always prided myself on standing up for my rights and my lifestyle. However, it seems that Karen Miller's personal crusade has now taken a bizarre turn. She has decided that my property, which I lawfully own and cherish for the freedom it affords me, should be subject to her community standards. Her lawsuit over violations on my non-HOA property is the final nail in the coffin of my patience. The stage is set in this high-strung suburban battleground, a place where every legal maneuver, every fine, is a conflict over the very right to choose one's own way of life. And as the legal papers arrived, it became clear that Karen had drawn a line in the sand. What she failed to anticipate was that my resolve, fortified by years of defying unnecessary restrictions, was about to flip the script in a way she could never have imagined. The lawsuit arrived on a gray morning that felt like any other, but as soon as I opened the envelope, the very fabric of my quiet rebellion was challenged. Karen Miller had filed a civil suit against me, accusing me of violating community standards on land I never agreed to subject to HOA oversight. I read the document in disbelief. My property is clearly outside the designated boundaries of Cedar Crest, yet Karen insisted that if my home wasn't compliant with her vision, then it needed to be corrected immediately. I immediately began gathering evidence to refute her claims. I dug into the county records, revisited the property deeds, and compiled every document proving that I purchased my land free of HOA obligations. I even reached out to a local attorney who confirmed that Karen's lawsuit was legally baseless. The determination that coursed through me was both invigorating and infuriating. How could someone so power-hungry use the law to enforce standards over a property that isn't even governed by their rules? Word about the lawsuit spread quickly throughout the community, and the responses were mixed. Some residents sympathized with me. They had long believed that the HOA was overreaching. Others were bewildered, unable to fathom why Karen would target someone who didn't even belong to her jurisdiction. Social media exploded with chatter. Hashtags such as hashtag #MyPropertyMyRules and hashtag #NoMoreKaren began trending locally. The digital outcry provided not just support, but also a platform for me to share the legal evidence that unequivocally showed that my property was independent and that her claims were nothing more than an attempt to control what wasn't hers to control. I recall the moment I confronted Karen at a community meeting organized by a faction of residents who opposed the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. I presented my documents and argued passionately about property rights and individual freedoms. Her face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief as I laid out the facts. "This isn't about community standards," I told the gathered crowd. "It's about the right to live without constant interference from someone who can't accept that not everyone wants to live exactly the same way." The meeting erupted in applause, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that my struggle was not mine alone. It was a battle for everyone's right to be different. But Karen wasn't one to back down. In subsequent days, she ramped up her tactics, insisting that she would take her case all the way to court and that my home should be forced into compliance with rules that had never been part of our agreement. Her rhetoric became more aggressive, her phone calls more frequent, and her threats, though legally empty, cut deep into the community's sense of fairness. It was then that I decided to take my fight to the next level. I knew that if I could not only defeat her legal claims, but also turn public opinion in my favor, I could force the HOA board to reconsider its stance once and for all. I began a digital campaign, posting video updates, detailed blogs, and even recorded testimonials for neighbors who had witnessed the absurdity of the situation. Every post reinforced the fact that my property was legally independent and that Karen's attempt to extend her control was both unjust and doomed to fail. My online community rallied behind me. Supportive messages poured in from former residents of similar strict communities who had faced the overreach of local authorities. The hashtag #NotYourHOA quickly became a rallying cry for those who believed in personal freedom and property rights. This escalating conflict was not without its risks. I was aware that Karen might use her connections within the HOA to try to intimidate or discredit me. But every threat, every veiled warning only steeled my determination. I contacted local legal experts and community activists to ensure that I was prepared for every eventuality. The battle was fast becoming a full-blown movement, a stand for the rights of all who refused to surrender their individuality to bureaucratic tyranny. Every day, I updated my digital dossier with new pieces of evidence, from court records to expert opinions. I even gathered over 500 signatures on a petition demanding that the HOA board dismiss Karen's lawsuit as a baseless extension of her personal vendetta. The digital evidence and community support were mounting, and I could sense that the tide was turning. Karen, clinging desperately to her outdated idea of order, was about to be forced into a corner by the very laws and voices she sought to control. As the lawsuit made its way toward the courthouse, the atmosphere in Cedar Crest grew electric with anticipation. Every day seemed to bring new digital posts and heated debates. Videos of my community meetings and snippets of my legal preparations were shared widely, fueling a fire of resistance among residents who were tired of arbitrary interference. The hashtag #MyPropertyMyRules was plastered on social media, and local forums buzzed with discussions about the sanctity of property rights and the overreach of HOA enforcers. Local news reporters began covering the story, capturing our town's divided sentiment. In one corner, you have residents fighting for their right to live free from bureaucratic control, one reporter explained on air, and in the other, a relentless enforcer determined to make everyone conform to an outdated set of rules. The news segments, often punctuated with interviews of outraged neighbors, painted the picture of a community at the crossroads of tradition and innovation, where individual freedom was clashing with the rigid structures of authority. Within the walls of the HOA board's office, internal turmoil was reaching a boiling point. Emergency meetings were convened, and heated conversations revealed a board that was fracturing under the pressure of mounting evidence and public outrage. Some board members, previously loyal to Karen's strict enforcement policies, began to question whether the rules should even apply to non-HOA property owners. Leaked documents and recorded discussions made it clear that the board was deeply divided, and the gravity of the situation was becoming undeniable even to those who had once supported Karen's every move. I maintained a relentless focus on my digital campaign. Every piece of evidence from my security cameras, every legal document, and every testimonial from supportive neighbors was meticulously assembled and posted online. Digital petitions demanding that the HOA dismiss the lawsuit as baseless swelled to thousands of signatures. Social media was abuzz with images of my home, accompanied by captions emphasizing my legal rights and the absurdity of Karen's claims. Each post, each comment, added weight to our movement, a growing chorus of voices echoing the fundamental truth that property rights are not negotiable. Karen's response was as dramatic as it was desperate. In a series of frantic video updates, she argued that my fine-evading property was an eyesore that needed to be brought under community control, even though I had never opted into the HOA. Her tone, forced and increasingly incoherent, was broadcast live to a digital audience that was increasingly unimpressed by her theatrics. Her stubborn insistence that her fine was justified became a symbol of an old order unwilling to evolve, a relic of a past where conformity was prized over individuality. As the legal proceedings advanced, the local courthouse became a battleground of ideas. I attended every pre-trial hearing, presenting my evidence calmly and factually. My lawyer emphasized the clear legal distinctions between HOA property and my privately owned land, and how Karen's lawsuit was nothing more than an overextension of her personal authority. The courtroom sessions were tense affairs, with each side delivering their arguments in careful, measured tones. Public support was evident. Neighbors gathered outside the courthouse, waving signs and holding banners that read, "Property rights matter," and "No more arbitrary fines." Amidst the escalating conflict, I received overwhelming messages of support from across the state. Former residents, community activists, and even local business owners expressed their solidarity. They shared stories of their own experiences with overreaching authorities and praised my courage in standing up for what's right. The digital community that had coalesced around my cause was no longer just a collection of angry posts. It had become a formidable force advocating for the right of every individual to live and innovate freely. In the face of such relentless opposition from the community, the pressure on the HOA board grew insurmountable. The mounting digital dossier, coupled with the public's overwhelming support, forced the board to schedule a final public hearing. A dramatic climax where the fate of Karen's lawsuit and the broader enforcement policies would be decided once and for all. As the final hearing approached, the energy in the community was palpable. Every whispered conversation on the street, every heated social media debate, every shared hashtag reinforced one simple truth. Our rights as homeowners and our right to live without arbitrary interference were at stake. The digital momentum was unstoppable, and it was clear that the day of reckoning for Karen and the HOA was drawing near. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in the packed boardroom of the Cedar Crest Community Center. The room was a sea of determined faces, HOA officials, legal representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of residents who had gathered to witness the final public hearing that would decide the fate of the baseless lawsuit. With a steady gaze and resolute tone, Councilwoman Valerie Thompson stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective will of a community that had endured too many arbitrary fines. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including security footage, legal documents, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Thompson began, her voice ringing with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, who is suing a property owner for violations on land that is entirely outside of the HOA's jurisdiction, were not rooted in any legitimate concern for community standards, but were driven by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights to private property and individual expression must be upheld, and no one should be allowed to dictate our lives from behind a clipboard. A heavy silence fell over the room as she continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will dismiss all claims made in this lawsuit and rescind any fines imposed as a result. Moreover, we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such an overreach. Today's decision is not just about setting the record straight. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Crest will no longer tolerate the imposition of personal vendettas on properties that are legally beyond our control. Her words resonated deeply, and steady nods and murmurs of agreement spread throughout the assembly. At that moment, a renowned community advocate, known for his steadfast commitment to property rights, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No resident should ever have to face baseless legal actions that threaten the very essence of their freedom. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values truth, fairness, and the right to live free of arbitrary control. We demand accountability and will not rest until every infringement on our rights is corrected." His words were met with thunderous applause, a powerful affirmation of the community's united stance. Following his address, a senior legal advisor presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record that included every piece of digital evidence confirming my property's legal status, documented errors in the HOA's claims, and expert testimonies that debunked Karen's arguments. The evidence was irrefutable. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict measures against any abuse of power, and the full report was slated for immediate public release. Councilwoman Thompson then concluded, "Let this resolution mark a new era for Cedar Crest, a community where every homeowner's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised solely on the basis of truth and fairness. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and refuse to allow anyone to wield power as a weapon against us. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to live as we choose." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle. In that defining moment, as every face in the room shone with hope and determination, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence, coupled with the resounding voice of the community, forced the HOA board to act decisively. A watershed moment that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Crest. The days of petty, arbitrary rule enforcement were finally over. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Crest underwent a profound transformation. News of the lawsuit's dismissal and the sweeping reforms adopted by the HOA board spread rapidly across local media and social networks, igniting spirited conversations about property rights, community governance, and the right to live freely without external control. Editorials in the local newspaper, sporting headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Crest" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive steps taken to safeguard individual rights. Hashtags like #MyPropertyMyRules, #NoMoreKaren, and #CommunityJustice trended widely, underscoring the collective determination of residents to stand against arbitrary interference. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as neighbors gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where creative expression and personal freedom were honored. Residents who had long lived in fear of baseless legal actions now spoke with renewed confidence about their right to manage their properties according to their own values. "Our homes are our sanctuaries," one impassioned speaker declared at a particularly crowded meeting, his voice resonating with the power of renewed hope. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the promise of a community that truly valued individual autonomy. Within the newly reformed HOA board and local legal circles, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and advised by prominent legal experts, initiated comprehensive training programs on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible enforcement of community rules. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established, ensuring that every complaint would be rigorously evaluated against actual legal standards rather than subjective whims. Our duty is to protect the rights and freedoms of every resident, reiterated one official during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the community's commitment to true justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized fervently, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns to empower residents with knowledge about their rights. When we stand together, our voices are unstoppable, a local activist proclaimed during a town hall session, urging every individual to claim their space and oppose arbitrary control. For me, the journey from receiving those court papers to standing victorious in that boardroom was deeply transformative. My decision to fight back against an HOA that sought to impose its will on property outside its jurisdiction was not just a personal rebellion. It was a testament to the power of community and the sanctity of individual rights. Neighbors who once felt isolated by the oppressive rules found their strength and shared their stories of resistance and renewal, uniting under the banner of property rights and creative freedom. Karen Miller, once the indomitable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when a united community rises to defend its freedoms. Digital records of her past misdeeds were circulated widely, and her influence over community standards began to wane. She became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked authority and the suppression of individuality. At a final celebratory gathering held in the Central Park of Cedar Crest, residents, community leaders, and officials came together beneath a canopy of twinkling lights and a banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights." Heartfelt speeches affirmed that the victory was not just mine, but every homeowner's, a pledge to never allow arbitrary fines or legal overreach to undermine their right to live and innovate. Today, we celebrate not only a legal victory, but the triumph of community values over authoritarian control. Councilwoman Thompson declared, her voice resonant and proud. The applause that followed was thunderous, a collective commitment that Cedar Crest would remain a beacon of freedom and creativity. Each new day in Cedar Crest now dawned with the promise that property rights, individual liberty, and creative expression would forever be cherished. The story of how I was sued by an overzealous enforcer for something that wasn't even under their jurisdiction, and how 911 ultimately escorted the absurdity away, became a rallying cry for all residents who believe in the right to live free from arbitrary control. In the end, what began as a personal legal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over a Cedar Crest that now celebrated individuality as much as order, it carried with it the promise that our community would always stand for justice, transparency, and true freedom.